All right, everybody, welcome back to Unstuck, where me, your host, Ethan, helps you get more unstuck in life every week. Whether that's your relationships, your friendships, your career, we are here to get unstuck. And I promise one day I will make that into a jingle. But for now, it's the same intro every week. So you're welcome. This week, I want to talk about something that we all go through. This is something that's universal and it's very important. And it's actually like one of the reasons that people feel stuck in their 20s. And it's part of a larger, I'll call it problem for now. And I'll reframe that in a bit. But the reason it's important is because feeling stuck is actually a phase within this larger process. And I haven't talked about this before, but I think it's important to like zoom out and understand the entire picture before we really dive into like ways to get unstuck from it. So the thing that I want to talk about this week is the quarter life crisis. This is something that plagues everybody in their 20s and and honestly sometimes 30s, and it's this like general dissatisfaction or discontentment with life. And I'll tell you why that exists. And to be honest, there are four phases of the quarter life crisis. And I'll go through each phase of the quarter life crisis, what it's about, why it happens, and then how to move forward or what to do within those phases. But my hope for you today is that you'll hear about these four phases of a quarter life crisis and identify with one of them and just realize that quarter life crisis is not a problem to be solved, but a process to go through. And the reason that's important is because we feel so much pain and we feel so much suffering within this feeling of feeling stuck and lost in the quarter life crisis because we're looking for solutions whenever a solution doesn't actually exist, right? This is a process and it's a journey to go through. So if you can equip yourself with the knowledge of how to move through each phase in the process more fluidly, with more ease, then you can get to the other side of it more quickly. So to be honest, the quarter life crisis is now being experienced by so many people earlier on. And I would actually equate it more to like a midlife crisis. And the reason for that is because our society is evolving, right? Technology is evolving, culture is evolving. We experience so much more life in a more compact period of time. And because of this, everything gets moved up. So we experience, and it's a good thing, right? Like it's better for this to happen whenever you're in your 20s or 30s instead of like your 40s or 50s. So think of it as like a rebranded midlife crisis and pull that forward to today as your quarter life crisis. So if you feel lost in your 20s, the chances are high that you're actually going through a quarter life crisis. So this is a process that every human has to go through. And the reason it happens is because what's being asked of us is to carve our own path in life. Because whenever you think about it, leading up until the time that you're like 25, 99% of your life has been decided for you, right? What college you're going to go to, who you're going to be, what's going to make you successful, who you should date. All of these things are just like pushed on you from the first time that you can understand things. So naturally, you're going to adapt, right? You're going to internalize that. You're going to accept that those are the things that you have to do in order to be successful. But it comes to a point when you're in your 20s that deep down, what's important to you and what you care about are a little bit different than what you've been told you should care about when you told that you should do. So it creates this like split path, right? One direction that you want to be going in versus the direction that you're kind of like already going in and trapped in. So the first of the four phases is this feeling of being trapped. It's literally being locked in a position of a life that you haven't actually decided, right? All these decisions have been made for you. You've been told how to be successful. And so you followed that path and you went down that road and you chased those things that were deemed would make you successful. And so you follow those to no fault of yours, but just because the world and your parents and the external environments were telling you that you have to do these things in order to find success in life. So whenever your life trajectory feels influenced by external factors and decided for you by external influences, of course it leads to this like feeling of, hey, I'm trapped in this life because it's been decided for me. Whereas on the inside, you're being asked to like do something completely different and to actually figure out who you are and what you care about. And so this is the first phase of the quarter life crisis, is that slow general feeling that you feel trapped in a life that like you haven't really decided is your own. And the primary reason this happens is because you're trapped in a life that doesn't align with your values. And honestly, the only thing to do in this phase is to reflect on the feelings, like why is this happening? What are the systems and the influences that were put in place to get me to where I am today? And do I value those things still? And if not, what do I value? Just start like asking yourself. This is a good time to journal and just like really sit with the emotions and try to process some emotions and just get a holistic picture of what's going on. The second phase of the quarter life crisis is called separation. And there's two parts of this. 2A is internal separation. So this is whenever you start to internally separate from the life that's been prescribed to you in phase one. You start to become discontent. You start slacking off. You feel unmotivated. Some people call you lazy in this phase. You just don't want to be doing anything anymore that has to do with your old life, right? Or your old career. And so you start moving towards distraction. And a lot of people in their 20s do this. They move towards partying so hard on the weekend so that they can escape their week. We start rebelling passively against this concept of being trapped in a life that we don't actually care about. So we start quiet quitting. We start thinking about looking for other jobs. We just don't care about the current position that we're in. And this causes so much pain and suffering because you're internally separating yourself and your psyche from the notion of this life that you don't care about that's been prescribed to you. And that's a painful place to be. And another part about internal separation is that this is where a majority of people would claim that they feel stuck in life, right? This is where like 80% of the stuckness, the people that feel stuck fall into this category and this phase because you absorb the fact that you've been prescribed one life and you've chased that and you've chased that definition of success for like decades and you've gotten to it, you've gotten to the end result of all those efforts, but something's missing. You're unfulfilled and you have a desire and you have honestly a need to move out of that to like create a new life, to separate yourself from it, to like find something that actually aligns with your values, but you don't know where to put that energy. That's the feeling of being stuck. You know that what's happening isn't going to work long term, but yet you still don't know how to make that better or how to fix that. And so what to do during this phase is just number one, first and foremost, accept that this is happening. Accept that it's okay to feel like you don't enjoy the life that you had previously been living or that you want something greater in life. Accepting it is actually the first step to moving through it and getting past this phase. When you think about all these phases, you have to move through each one. You can't skip them, you can't reorder them. You have to move through them. And there's been a ton of research on this. I'll link the article that I'm referencing in this episode in the show notes. This is scientifically studied, and they did a study on 50 people that were having a quarter life crisis. And they identified all of the phases that they were in and they organized them and put them into this article, into this framework for understanding how to move through the quarter life crisis. So, after accepting the fact that you're having an internal separation, that you're stuck, that this life that you had previously been living won't necessarily work for you anymore, next comes the physical separation. This is phase 2B. So, the physical separation happens whenever you start thinking about, okay, how can I literally distance myself from this life that I don't want anymore? How can I move across the country? How can I start a new job? How can I get out of the relationship I feel stuck in? How can I put as much distance between me and that life as possible? And this is the most transformative part. This is the pivot. This is the turning point. This is where all your cards are on the table. You're looking forward and you see your old life in the rearview mirror, and you have to decide, am I going to step on the gas and move forward, or am I going back? And the only thing to do in this phase 2B, is to not go back to your old life. Don't fall for it. It's a trick. It's a trick that's being played on you by your brain to go back and feel comfortable because it's predictable and you know what's there, what's waiting for you. Nothing has to change. You don't have to be challenged. You have to be uncomfortable. But my challenge to you is in this moment, when you're in phase 2B, what you have to do is commit to move forward. Do not go backwards. Do not move back to the place you lived in prior because you're nostalgic for it. Do not go back to the old job that's reaching out to you, asking you to come back. Do not go back to the old way of thinking or like the old definition of success. And one of the greatest analogies I have for this exact moment, and a lot of my friends, or now that I'm thinking about it retroactively, they were in phase 2B whenever they were deciding what to do or if they want to go to business school, right? Because graduate business school is a continuation of this prior idea of success they held, that if you chase academic success and you pursue good grades and you pursue this lifestyle, that you will be a successful person. And they decided that, okay, I'm going to go $200,000 into debt because I want to chase that and I want that feeling again of being academically successful. I've been out of school for 2 or 3 years now. I've seen the real world. It's hard and life is hard. And I'm being asked to like pursue a life that maybe necessarily I don't even like anymore. But instead of carving a new path forward and taking the time to like think about what they want to do in life, they revert back to comfort and say, oh, you know what? When I was being raised, academic success was the number one priority and like the number one thing that I was told to focus on. So I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to apply to business school. I'm going to go to school and then I'm going to figure my life out after that. And guess what? They all did that. They all had amazing experiences. Obviously, it's fun to go back to school. You get 2 more spring breaks. Like you get all these trips together with your clusters, whatever. But plot twist, like at the end of the day, they came back to their jobs after 2 years in similar industries, working for like similar companies. And then 2 years after that, they felt the exact same way, except this time there was no business school to apply to. So now they have to go through this process of feeling stuck again and like deciding what they want to do. So, all that to say is don't fall for the trap in this phase, in phase 2B, whenever you're being called to physically separate from your old life. Don't fall for the trap of moving backwards. It will never work. It doesn't work. And the only thing to do is move forward. And I'll tell you how to do that. Phase 3 is what you get to after you decided to physically separate from your old life. And this is what people say whenever they say your new life is going to cost you your old one. This is when that takes place after phase 2B, after the separation, and moving into phase 3, which is exploration. This is where you explore who it is that you're actually meant to be. And I'm just going to draw a parallel here. This is what a lot of people experience as their Saturn returns, right? Is after 25, they start to reach like 26, 27. They've done phase 1, phase 2A, phase 2B, and they get to this point where they're like, okay, Saturn returns. I'm being asked to decide what's important for me in life. And I'm going through it because all of these areas and all of these ideas of success that I used to have in the past are no longer serving me. And that's causing pain in my life and it's causing issues. And you perceive that as like this quote unquote Saturn returns, which I'm not disqualifying. Maybe that is a thing that happens in astrology, but what we're experiencing is that our old life is butting heads with our internal values and what we actually want out of life. And whenever that happens, it causes chaos and it causes pain. So in phase 3, what you're being asked to do is explore everything, explore your values, explore your interests, figure out what it is that you like, figure out who you are as a person and like what you're trying to express to the world. This is what people call the work. This is whenever you get dirty and you get deep into the work of who you are as a person and you really try to understand why you're here. You have to give yourself radical permission to explore new interests, explore new values. And I have a lot of exercises in my past episodes telling you how to explore your value system and how to explore your interests. So go check those out. I'll link those in the show notes. But for now, what I want to say is you have to give yourself permission to explore your interests and pull at the thread of curiosity and fascination, because that's how you discover who you are. And this is an iterative process. It's okay. And you have to be okay in this phase failing. You have to be okay with being a beginner at things. And if you've done the work of phases 1, 2A, 2B, and you've gotten this far to phase 3, you won't have any of the negative charges associated with like the sunk cost fallacy of, oh, I've spent 11 years chasing the success of my prior life. This is a point wherever you're actually able and willing and ready to accept new truths about the world and yourself and new truths about your interest and what you actually want to be doing. So you have to do all of the work. And that's why these phases have to happen in the very specific order so that when you get to phase 3, you're ready to accept new truths and you're ready to like expand your mind and your thought processes. So this is whenever the deep work happens and you have to decide like, what do I actually care about? Why am I here? Why do I want to pursue certain things? and you just have to like experiment. It truly is an experimentation process. You're exploring, you're giving yourself permission and time to truly explore things that you find interesting and valuable. This is wherever you're crafting the new life that you're going to chase in step 4. So step 4 is called rebuilding. This is whenever you start rebuilding your life around the information that you gathered in step 3. You start creating a life based on the values that you've learned and that you've identified that you have in step 3. You basically, if you think about it visually, for all my visual people out there, in phase 1, you're recognizing that your life has kind of split into two paths. You have on the left side, like your life that was prescribed to you and the traditional definitions of success that were prescribed to you. And then you have the imaginary path on the right, which is like the path that your life would have taken or that your soul is asking you to take based on your like interests and values. And they diverge and they truly are split. And then phase 2A happens, phase 2B happens, and they're far apart now. And what happens in phase 4 and phase 3 is like your real life on the left where you've taken where you're actually going and you then split that into two paths, right? You let the path that is your old life kind of wither away. You let it just happen like you don't identify with it anymore, but you start creating a new path on the left side, and that goes in a different direction. And that direction heads back to the road to meet up with that initial right side that you left behind all those years ago. Whenever they meet up, that's whenever you become fully integrated and you start pulling your life back towards your value system and your internal interests. The outcome of this phase is that you start leading a life that is more closely aligned with your intrinsic motivation and what really fires you up. Your external physical actions are aligned with your internal intrinsically motivated actions. Whatever you're doing externally aligns with what you deeply care about internally. So in this phase, what you can do is focus on exploring career paths or hobbies that align with your value system. Like really sit down and be like, okay, if I value respect, trust, curiosity, and friendship, what are things that I can do that embody those values? What are literal hobbies and things and actions I can take that embody those things? And a good way to do this is just ask yourself when you go about your day, like, is what I'm about to do embodying my values? Is what I'm about to do embodying the value of curiosity? Is it embodying the value of friendship and trust and respect? If it's not, don't do those things. And this is actually how you start to build self-trust in this regard as well. So the end goal here is to start creating a life where you're spending the majority of your time doing things that align with your intrinsic values and your internal value system. This is whenever you can start the work of finding your purpose. And that's why this equation seems so hard for a lot of people and why it seems so unattainable is because it's this massive question of what is my purpose? And a lot of times we're feeling stuck and we're feeling discontent and we want to answer that question, but we're still back in phase 1 and we can't even begin to answer this question until we get to phase 4, which requires us to go through phases 1, 2A, 2B, and 3. So whenever you approach this question of what is my purpose, and you're still in phase 1, it's impossible to answer. It's painful to try to answer because you don't know yourself. You haven't given yourself enough permission to actually go out, separate from your old life, and explore your new interests. So it's impossible to answer. So I'm challenging you that instead of like brewing and wondering like why do I feel so lonely? Why am I so lost? Why don't I know my purpose? Identify which phase you're in. And if it's phase 1 or phase 2A, phase 2B, phase 3, move through them gracefully. Know what's ahead of you. Know that at the end of this process, you're going to have created a life that actually aligns with who you are as a person and what you want to be doing. It's a beautiful process. And honestly, if I had to go back to the beginning of my process in phase 1, and not go through it, I would not choose that. I would choose to go through it in the exact same way that I moved through it the first time because it ended in this beautiful culmination of me having to identify, being forced to identify what's valuable to me, and also forced to commit to spending time doing it and pursuing it. So, in conclusion, this process and whatever phase you're in becomes a lot easier when you just accept the fact that this is a process that everybody goes through, not a problem that you individually have to solve. So whenever you're in phases 1, 2, or 3, and you're thinking like, how do I solve this issue? Like, how do I create the life that I want for myself? You aren't quite ready to answer that question yet. You have to move through the phases before you start answering that question. And I know that that's counterintuitive because a lot of people want immediate gratification. They want immediate things to do in order to create a better life for themselves. But what I'm telling you is commit to doing the work of going through these phases and being open and honest with yourself and being vulnerable. And when you get to phases 3 and 4 and you start actually understanding more about yourself and creating the life that you want, that's whenever the magic starts to happen. That's whenever your life starts to change. So just trust the process. And I know it's the last thing people want to hear, but it really is the most important thing you can do. Like, what would happen if you just took a step back and you leaned into whatever phase you were in, knowing that the next phase was coming and that the past phase is over and can never come again? What would you do? How would that look? Like, what would your life look like if you actually just leaned into the process and gave yourself the permission to move through these steps sequentially? And something else that I want to say is whenever you realize that this is a cycle and phases 1 through 4 are similar to like the seasons, right? Every human goes through it. And to be honest, you'll probably go through it several times in life. That's why like the Saturn returns happens twice in your life, 3 times if you live long enough, because every so often you're being asked to reevaluate, is what I'm doing aligned with what I care about and who I am as a person? And that happens every so often because your soul is always pulling you in one direction. Your intrinsic values, your intrinsic motivation, your internal value system, your soul, they're all pulling you in the same direction over your life. But what we do is just over time, we have to readjust, make small tweaks to try to like bring back our external physical life closer to that path, that internal path that is always being guided for us. We already have an internal navigation system. That compass is always pointing the right direction. You just have to get in tune with it and be brave enough to align your external actions and your external world with that internal compass. After you move through this the first time, knowing that it might happen again the second time, you can feel comfortable with that because you already had the tools and the understanding to process it and make it through to the other side. So it's not a scary process. And accepting that and really internalizing it is the most important thing you can do right now. So I want to know, what phase are you in and what can you do today to lean into that phase and accept it, process it, and move through it so you can get to the next phase and get it over with faster. So I'll leave you with that question. And I just want to follow that up by saying, I'm always available to talk. I would love to hear about what phase you're in. You can always reply to my newsletter whenever it goes out every week on Wednesday. You can always leave a comment on my YouTube videos. You can DM me on Instagram. I will look at all of them and I'll respond to all of them. I want to know what phase you're in and how I can help you get to the next phase, how I can help you level up. So just keep that in mind. Like, you are not alone. I'm here to help you however I can. I've gone through this. It's a painful process, but it is so worth it in the end. So that's all I have for you this week. And I hope it was helpful. And I can't wait to talk to you again next week. And before you click out of this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you took 5 seconds to rate my podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. It helps me continue making episodes and continue helping put out content that will help you get more unstuck in life and move through life in a more purposeful way. So, thank you again so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. All right. Bye, everyone.